Celeste Quinn's fingers drummed impatiently on the edge of her desk as she stared at the screen in front of her. A series of reports outlining a new venture on the alien planet Aratzes. Her tech empire had expanded there, and the profits were flowing in. Yet, in recent weeks, she'd been receiving troubling reports, ones that she couldn't simply dismiss. Workers in the new facility had been sending anonymous messages about unsafe working conditions, abuse, and corruption, issues that could cause a massive public relations disaster. Celeste wasn't the type to pay attention to rumors. She was a CEO, not a babysitter. But these reports were becoming impossible to ignore. The anonymity of the complaints didn't help matters. But she knew the truth was often hidden behind the fog of corporate gloss. She leaned forward, a smirk tugging at her lips. She would deal with it her way. She made a decision. No one in the company knew this, but Celeste had once been a worker herself. She'd built this empire from the ground up, using her sharp business acumen, and she knew how to spot a lie from miles away. What better way to uncover the truth than to get her hands dirty, go undercover, and witness it all firsthand? She didn't care if she had to work a few weeks as a lowly employee. It would be worth it. Her company had always been a reflection of her success. If there was corruption, if there were flaws, she would weed them out herself. Nobody was going to ruin her reputation, not when she was so close to securing an even larger market share on Aratzes. Let's see how bad it really is, Celeste muttered to herself, a cold determination in her eyes. Her assistant, Kellen, was the only one who knew what was happening. He would ensure everything was handled while she was gone. No one could know the CEO was actually in the ranks now, wearing the same uniform as the workers, blending in among the lower levels of the organization. A few weeks, maybe a month, just long enough to expose whatever was going wrong without anyone suspecting a thing. The shuttle ride to Aratzes was uncomfortable. Celeste wasn't used to travel without luxury. The vessel was modest, designed for the workers who'd come to this planet to help expand her company's footprint. She kept her head low, disguising her face under a hood and thick, dark glasses. When she landed, she was greeted by an unassuming driver who took her to the worker dormitory where she would be staying, a modest building far removed from the glitzy offices that Celeste was accustomed to. Her plan was simple: live as one of the workers, observe them, blend in, and report back. She would act like a low-ranking assistant in the alien division of the company and observe the workers' behavior up close. She wasn't going to let her identity slip. Not yet. Celeste arrived at her assigned quarters, the room small and unremarkable. It smelled faintly of fresh paint, and the walls were lined with utilitarian furniture. This wasn't the kind of place Celeste had ever imagined herself living in. But she set her belongings down and immediately began to plan for the day ahead. It would be crucial to integrate herself into the workforce without drawing attention. The next morning, she donned the standard-issue uniform. It was a dull gray jumpsuit, not unlike the uniforms worn by every worker in the facility, and she put it on with a practiced air. She had been through worse conditions before, back when she had been building her first business, but this felt different. Here, there were no walls of glass and polished steel. There were no gleaming desks, no influential meetings. Just her and the anonymous faces of the workers. Celeste walked into the main work area, her heart pounding despite herself. The hum of machinery surrounded her, the sound of thousands of data screens flickering in the background as workers punched in numbers, analyzed data, and completed their tasks. She had expected this level of efficiency. After all, it was her empire running the show. But something felt off, a subtle undercurrent in the air that she couldn't quite place. As Celeste took her assigned station, she looked around and noticed something unsettling. The workers were on edge, some of them exchanging quick, nervous glances. Others walked with a sense of exhaustion in their eyes, their shoulders slumped. The atmosphere in the room was tense, the air thick with unspoken frustration. Celeste realized the rumors had been true. Something wasn't right here. And then she saw her, Lyra. Lyra was an alien woman, tall and slender with cerulean skin and sharp features. Her hair was a cascade of dark tendrils, a rich contrast to her skin. She moved gracefully through the room, navigating the chaos with a confidence that caught Celeste's attention. But it wasn't just her poise that stood out. It was the way Lyra interacted with others. She was different from the others. There was a kindness in her eyes, an empathy in the way she spoke to the workers, a sense of care that was missing from the others around her. Lyra caught Celeste's gaze for a brief moment, and the subtle shift in her expression told Celeste everything she needed to know. Lyra was aware of her presence, watching her carefully. Celeste's heart skipped a beat before she quickly turned back to her task, trying to shake off the feeling of being scrutinized. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to uncover the truth. But as the day wore on, Celeste found herself drawn to Lyra more and more. There was something magnetic about her, an undeniable charm in the way she carried herself. Lyra moved through the workplace like a quiet leader, taking charge when necessary, offering a smile when things grew too tense. It was clear that the workers respected her, but there was also a fragility about her. Celeste couldn't help but feel an odd connection, something stirring inside her that she hadn't felt in years. Despite herself, Celeste began to pay closer attention to Lyra. She noticed the way she would occasionally stop and offer encouragement to the other workers, how she was always the first to volunteer when something went wrong. Celeste admired that, even though she knew better than to let emotions cloud her judgment. It wasn't long before Lyra came over to Celeste's station. Celeste tensed, unsure of what to expect. Lyra didn't waste time with pleasantries, instead cutting straight to the point. "You're new here, right?" Lyra's voice was soft but confident, her eyes studying Celeste with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Celeste swallowed, forcing a smile onto her face. "Just learning the ropes," she replied, trying to keep her voice neutral. Lyra raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "If you need anything, just let me know. We help each other around here," she said, offering a quick, genuine smile before moving on to assist another worker. Celeste watched her go, a mix of admiration and unease swirling within her. She had been expecting to find something to exploit, something that would allow her to tear down the corrupt systems in her company. But what she had found instead was Lyra, and Celeste couldn't help but wonder how much of this investigation would be clouded by the growing attraction she was beginning to feel for this alien woman. The following days blurred together in a haze of monotonous routines and quiet observation. Celeste kept her head down, following the motions of the other workers and trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. Her days were spent analyzing data, answering calls, and performing menial tasks, while her nights were filled with restless thoughts, plagued by the growing pull she felt toward Lyra. Every glance from the alien woman sent a shiver down her spine, and Celeste found it harder and harder to pretend that her involvement here was purely professional. Lyra's presence had an undeniable warmth to it. Despite the oppressive atmosphere in the facility, Lyra moved through the space with an ease that Celeste could never emulate. There was a grace in the way she carried herself, quietly confident, but never arrogant. She helped her colleagues with small tasks, offered advice, and even comforted those who had suffered under the rigors of the workday. Celeste had never seen such kindness in a place that had always been defined by numbers and profit margins. It wasn't long before Celeste found herself seeking out Lyra's company, even though she couldn't quite explain why. During lunch breaks, when the workers gathered in the cafeteria, Celeste would deliberately sit nearby, just close enough to catch snippets of Lyra's conversation with others. She learned that Lyra was deeply invested in the well-being of the workers, something Celeste had never witnessed at her level. Lyra knew everyone by name, and the way she greeted each of them was like a quiet promise that they mattered, that they were more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. There were moments when Celeste would catch Lyra's gaze across the room, and in those fleeting seconds, their eyes would lock. There was no mistaking the connection between them. Lyra's eyes, a deep shade of violet, held curiosity and something more, a silent acknowledgement that she knew Celeste was different from the other workers. It unsettled Celeste, yet she couldn't look away. One afternoon, as they worked side by side at their stations, Celeste felt the weight of Lyra's presence beside her. Lyra was helping a fellow worker with a malfunctioning data terminal, and Celeste watched her move with such focused precision that it took her a moment to realize she had been staring. Lyra glanced over and caught her gaze, and for a moment, Celeste felt exposed. She quickly looked away, but Lyra didn't seem to mind. She continued her work, unfazed, and yet, there was something in the way she held herself. Something that made Celeste feel like she had been seen in a way no one else had ever bothered to. It was as though Lyra could sense something deeper, something that Celeste hadn't yet confronted herself. Later that evening, as the workers wrapped up for the day and filed out of the facility, Lyra caught up to Celeste. Her footsteps were light, but Celeste could feel the shift in the air as Lyra drew closer. "Hey," Lyra said softly, her voice a gentle lilt in the hum of the building. "You don't talk much, do you?" Celeste stiffened. The last thing she wanted was to stand out, but here Lyra was, drawing attention to her quietness. She forced a smile, trying to keep her tone casual. "I'm just here to do my job." Lyra tilted her head, studying her with those knowing eyes. "You're a hard worker, but you look like you're carrying something. You're not just here for the job, are you?" The question hit too close to home. Celeste swallowed, trying to push down the discomfort rising in her chest. Her instincts screamed at her to shut the conversation down, to remind Lyra that they were nothing more than colleagues. Nothing more than two strangers thrown together by circumstance. But there was something about Lyra's presence, her sincerity, that made the words stick in Celeste's throat. Celeste hesitated, unsure how to continue. "I don't have much to say, just keeping my head down." Lyra's eyes softened, and she gave Celeste a small, understanding smile. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Sometimes this place can make you feel like you're invisible. But I see you." Celeste froze. The weight of Lyra's words lingered in the air, and for a moment, she felt the walls around her heart crack open. But she quickly shut them down again. She couldn't afford to let anyone see the cracks, especially not Lyra. Not when she had so much to lose. "Thanks," Celeste said, her voice tight. "But I'm fine." Lyra gave her a nod, the kindness in her eyes never wavering, and with that, she turned and walked away. Celeste watched her go, her heart thumping in her chest. What had just happened? Why did it feel like a door had just been opened? One that she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. As the days passed, Celeste's internal conflict grew. She was here to uncover the flaws in the company's practices, to expose the corruption and mistreatment of the workers. But the more time she spent with Lyra, the harder it became to separate herself from the very people she was supposed to be investigating. She found herself questioning her own motivations, wondering if she was more drawn to Lyra's kindness than she was to the idea of rooting out the problems within her company. Every time Lyra spoke to her, every moment they shared, Celeste felt the tension in her chest tighten. The attraction was undeniable, but it wasn't just physical. There was something about Lyra that made Celeste feel vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It was like Lyra had seen through her polished exterior and into the parts of Celeste she had buried deep inside. But Celeste couldn't afford to let herself fall into this trap. She couldn't get close to Lyra, couldn't allow herself to be distracted by the pull between them. She had a job to do, a mission to complete. Yet, when she saw Lyra again on the following day, standing in front of a group of workers, calmly talking them through a difficult task, Celeste found herself watching, her heart pounding. Lyra's presence seemed to fill the room, her voice a soothing balm to the workers who had grown jaded by the endless demands of the facility. Lyra caught Celeste's eye again, and this time, Celeste didn't look away. There was something undeniable in the moment, an understanding between them that neither could ignore. Lyra's gaze softened, and for a brief second, Celeste swore she saw a flicker of something deeper. Something unspoken. Something that reached beyond the walls of the facility. But then the moment was gone, and Lyra turned her attention back to the group of workers. Celeste swallowed hard, her pulse racing. It was becoming harder and harder to ignore the emotions swirling within her. But she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a job anymore. Not for her. And as much as she tried to deny it, she knew she was starting to care about Lyra in a way she never intended. The days blurred together, each one a mix of tedious work and the quiet tension between Celeste and Lyra. Celeste had been careful not to let her feelings slip. At least, She hoped she had. She was still the same CEO, the same calculating businesswoman who had built an empire from the ground up. But every time Lyra smiled at her, every time their eyes met across the crowded break room or in the depths of the factory floor, Celeste felt a sharp pull in her chest. It was as if Lyra had somehow wrapped her around her finger, and Celeste wasn't sure how much longer she could pretend that it didn't matter. The tension between them continued to simmer, a slow burn that neither of them spoke of, but that both could feel. Celeste tried to focus on her investigation, talking to workers, watching for signs of injustice, listening for complaints, but every moment spent observing Lyra made it harder to stay detached. She felt something inside her shift with each passing day, the walls she'd built around her heart crumbling under the weight of Lyra's kindness, her quiet strength. It was on the fourth day of Celeste's undercover assignment that things began to unravel. She had been working alongside Lyra in the main operations area, running data and processing orders, when a sudden commotion in the corner of the room caught their attention. Celeste glanced up to see a young worker, a man who looked no older than 20, arguing with one of the supervisors. His face was red with frustration, his fists clenched as he shouted at the older man, who was standing with arms crossed, a smug look on his face. "Get your hands off me!" the young man snapped, his voice sharp with anger. "You can't just take my hours like that. I've been working my ass off, and you know it." Celeste's gaze flickered to Lyra, who was already moving toward the confrontation, her face a mask of calm. Lyra's body language was measured, and Celeste couldn't help but admire the way she held herself in such tense moments. But there was something else, something that Celeste hadn't expected to see. As Lyra reached the young worker, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, speaking to him in soft, soothing tones. "It's going to be okay," Lyra said, her voice steady. "I'll take care of this." The young worker, still shaking with anger, glanced at her, his expression softening. There was something in the way Lyra spoke, something that calmed him instantly. Celeste watched, fascinated by the way Lyra handled the situation. How she took control without raising her voice. How she de-escalated the conflict with a simple touch and a few words. The supervisor, meanwhile, seemed to bristle at Lyra's intervention but said nothing. After a tense moment, he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. The young worker sighed in relief, and Lyra gave him a quick smile before turning back to her task, as if nothing had happened. Celeste remained rooted to the spot, her eyes following Lyra's every movement. There was something magnetic about her, something that pulled at Celeste in a way that was impossible to ignore. She had seen power before, but never like this. Lyra had a quiet, unshakable authority, a strength that didn't come from rank or position, but from something deeper, something intrinsic. As the day wore on, Celeste couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She had seen Lyra interact with other workers before, but never quite like that. She was more than just a kind colleague. Lyra was someone who inspired loyalty, who made people believe that they mattered. And Celeste, who had built her entire career on cold efficiency and calculated moves, found herself deeply conflicted. She wasn't supposed to care about these people, not in the way Lyra did. She wasn't supposed to get caught up in their lives, in their struggles. She was here for a reason, and that reason had nothing to do with building relationships. Yet, as the evening drew closer and the workers filtered out of the facility, Celeste found herself lingering by the exit. She didn't know why she was waiting, only that she couldn't bring herself to leave without seeing Lyra again. She had to know more. About her, about the way she worked, about what drove her to care so deeply. Finally, just as the last of the workers filed out, Lyra appeared, her silhouette framed by the light from the building. Celeste hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, her footsteps quickening as she approached Lyra. "Hey," Celeste said, her voice quiet but steady. Lyra turned, surprised to see her still there. She smiled, though there was a touch of wariness in her expression. "Is something wrong?" "No," Celeste replied, her heart pounding in her chest. I just wanted to talk. About earlier." Lyra raised an eyebrow, clearly unsure where this was going. "There's nothing to talk about. Just a typical day." I saw the way you handled that situation with the worker, Celeste said, her voice softer now. You're good at what you do. Lyra's smile faltered, and she gave a small, almost reluctant shrug. I just try to make sure people don't feel like they're invisible. Everyone deserves respect. Celeste's heart skipped a beat. There was something in those words, something that spoke to a part of her that she had long since buried. Respect. It had been so long since Celeste had allowed herself to think about respect in any form other than as a tool to achieve power. You really care about them, Celeste said before she could stop herself. Her voice held a note of awe, and she cursed herself immediately for sounding vulnerable. Lyra didn't seem to notice the slip. She studied Celeste for a moment, as if weighing her words, before replying, I do. I mean, we're all just trying to get by. If I can help make that a little easier for someone, then I will. Celeste swallowed, feeling something stir in her chest. She wanted to ask more. About why Lyra did this, about what drove her. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself taking a step closer, the air between them thick with unspoken thoughts. Why? Celeste blurted out before she could stop herself. Why do you care so much? Lyra's gaze softened, and for a moment, Celeste saw a flicker of something more in her eyes. A sadness, perhaps, or a vulnerability. Lyra opened her mouth to speak, but before she could answer, a loud voice called from across the yard, breaking the moment. Lyra! One of the workers shouted, waving her over. Lyra glanced at Celeste, then back at the worker. I have to go, she said quietly, the warmth in her expression dimming just a little. We'll talk another time. Celeste watched her go, the weight of the conversation still hanging between them. She had wanted to know more about Lyra, about the way she moved through the world, but for now it would have to wait. Lyra had been a mystery, one that Celeste was desperate to unravel. But with every passing day, she found that the more she uncovered, the more questions she had. And as much as she wanted to push forward, to keep her distance and stick to her mission, Celeste knew that the pull between them was only growing stronger. She wasn't sure how much longer she could ignore it. The following days felt like a blur to Celeste. She continued her work at the facility, going through the motions with a sense of detachment that had become second nature over the years. She analyzed reports, reviewed budgets, and dealt with the daily management of her company's operations. But every time she passed Lyra, her heart would flutter, a brief reminder that the walls she had so carefully constructed were no match for the pull of her emotions. The unease that had been growing in her chest intensified. She couldn't seem to shake the feeling that there was something she needed to confront, something about her feelings for Lyra that she was afraid to face. Despite the constant ache of this unspoken connection, Celeste had managed to keep her distance. Every time they spoke, every time they exchanged a glance, she felt the tension building, but she refused to allow it to reach the breaking point. Her mission was still the same: uncover the injustices and corruption in the company. Lyra was just another piece of the puzzle. But deep down, Celeste knew that was no longer true. Lyra had become more than that. She was a person Celeste couldn't ignore, someone who had stirred something in her, a sense of humanity she had buried long ago. It was late one evening when everything came to a head. Celeste had stayed behind to catch up on paperwork, her mind drifting between the endless stacks of reports. She could feel the fatigue settling in her bones, but she couldn't tear herself away. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra, the way she moved, the way she spoke to the workers, the way she made Celeste feel seen in ways no one else had. And now, after days of pretending nothing had changed, Celeste could feel herself on the edge of something she wasn't sure she was ready for. As she worked late into the night, she heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up, surprised to see Lyra standing in the doorway of her office, her figure bathed in the soft glow of the hallway lights. There was something different about Lyra tonight, something that made her look even more striking than usual. Her violet eyes were soft, but there was an intensity in them, an unspoken understanding that Celeste couldn't quite decipher. Hey, Lyra said, her voice low, almost hesitant. Can we talk? Celeste's heart skipped a beat. She swallowed, trying to steady herself. Of course. What's on your mind? Lyra stepped into the office, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. She stood for a moment, as if collecting her thoughts. There was an odd tension in the air between them, thick and palpable. Celeste didn't know what Lyra wanted to say, but she had a sinking feeling that it wasn't going to be easy to hear. I know things have been weird, Lyra began, her gaze shifting away for a moment, as if unsure of how to continue. We've been dancing around this, and I can't help but feel like we're both avoiding something. Celeste felt her pulse quicken. She had no idea what Lyra was getting at, but she already knew she wasn't ready to face the truth of what was happening between them. Lyra, Celeste started, her voice strained. I'm here for the same reason you are, to do my job. That's all. Lyra's gaze flickered back to Celeste, her expression unreadable. I know what you're doing here, she said quietly. You're undercover, aren't you? The words hit Celeste like a punch to the gut. She had never expected Lyra to figure it out. She had been so careful, so precise in maintaining the facade, and yet here it was, exposed. Her mind raced, her instincts screaming to deny it, to make Lyra believe that she was just like everyone else, just another part of the system. But something in Lyra's eyes, the way she looked at her with a mixture of concern and understanding, stopped her. You're right, Celeste said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm here to uncover the corruption, the exploitation. I didn't think it would be like this, but here we are. Lyra took a step closer, her gaze softening. I figured something was off. The way you've been acting, the way you've distanced yourself from everyone. I could tell there was more going on. And now, I'm starting to think that maybe you didn't come here just to expose the system. Maybe you came here because you wanted to be seen. Celeste's heart thudded painfully in her chest. The words hit too close to home. She had tried so hard to distance herself from everything, to keep everything at arm's length. But Lyra had seen right through her. There was no hiding now. I didn't expect things to happen like this, Celeste said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. I didn't expect to feel anything for you. Lyra's expression softened, and for a moment, Celeste could see the weight of everything between them. She wasn't just an employee to Lyra. She wasn't just the CEO of the company. She was a person Lyra had come to care for, despite the circumstances. I know, Lyra said gently. I didn't expect it either, but I can't pretend that I don't care. I can't pretend that I don't see you, Celeste, that I don't see how much you're struggling with all of this. Celeste looked away, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She couldn't handle this. She couldn't bear the weight of Lyra's gaze, the kindness in her words. How had it come to this? How had she allowed herself to care so much? I don't know what I'm doing, Celeste admitted, her voice thick with emotion. I came here to expose the wrongs, to make things right. But I don't know if I can do that anymore. Not without hurting people like you. Not without hurting you. There was a long pause as Lyra stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. Celeste could feel her warmth, the closeness, the way Lyra's quiet strength seemed to surround her. Lyra reached out, her hand brushing gently against Celeste's arm. A touch so soft it might have been a dream, but it was real, and it was all Celeste could do not to shudder at the electricity that passed between them. You don't have to choose between doing what's right and caring for others, Lyra said quietly, her voice a soothing balm to the rawness Celeste felt. You can do both. It's just going to be hard. It's going to be messy. Celeste closed her eyes, her breath coming in shaky gasps. She wanted to believe her, wanted to think that there was a way out of this tangled mess she had found herself in. But everything was so complicated now. She couldn't ignore her feelings, but she also couldn't ignore the truth of why she had come here in the first place. Maybe you're right, Celeste whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Maybe I can't do both. Lyra stood there, silent for a moment, before she took a deep breath and spoke again. You don't have to make a decision tonight, but you can't keep pretending it doesn't matter. Celeste opened her eyes and looked at Lyra, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision ahead. She had been running from this truth for so long, But now it was undeniable. Something was happening between them, something that could change everything. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now, Celeste confessed, her voice barely audible. Lyra didn't answer immediately, but the look in her eyes said everything. They were both at a crossroads, and neither of them knew which path they would take. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Their lives had irrevocably changed. As Lyra turned to leave, Celeste stood still, watching her go. The tension between them hung in the air, thick with unspoken possibilities. As the door clicked shut behind Lyra, Celeste wasn't sure what the next step would be. But she knew this much. Whatever happened, she would have to face the truth of her feelings for Lyra, and the truth of what she was willing to sacrifice to be with her. But for now, that would have to wait. The following days felt like a delicate balancing act. Celeste continued to navigate the delicate web of her undercover investigation, keeping up the pretense of being just another executive working to improve the company's bottom line. But inside, the pressure was mounting. Every interaction with Lyra seemed to peel back another layer of the walls Celeste had spent years constructing. Lyra's presence, her quiet strength and unyielding compassion, made it harder for Celeste to ignore the emotional connection that had been growing between them. But she couldn't let herself get lost in it. Not when so much was at stake. Lyra, too, seemed to carry the weight of their unspoken tension. She wasn't acting the same. Gone was the warm, unguarded kindness that had made Celeste's heart ache with longing. Instead, there was a coolness in Lyra's demeanor, a slight distance that made it clear she was struggling with their situation just as much as Celeste was. They no longer shared lingering glances or quiet conversations during late hours. It was as if they were both waiting for something, though neither of them knew what that something was. Despite this growing distance, Celeste found herself increasingly drawn to Lyra in ways she couldn't control. She knew she couldn't continue this charade much longer, but every time she thought about revealing her true identity, a swell of guilt washed over her. She had built a life on control, on playing people like pieces on a chessboard. But Lyra wasn't just a piece. She was someone real, someone Celeste could no longer manipulate, no longer dismiss, and that frightened her more than anything else. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the soft glow of the overhead lights flickered on inside the facility, Celeste made a decision. She couldn't keep pretending. She couldn't keep lying to Lyra, to herself. It was time to stop running. She walked into the factory floor, her heels clicking on the concrete floor, her heart pounding in her chest. She spotted Lyra near the back, gathering papers and tidying up the workstations. Her posture was rigid, her movements efficient but stiff, unlike the easy grace Celeste had come to expect. As she approached, Lyra looked up, her expression guarded. "You wanted to talk?" Lyra asked, her voice colder than Celeste had ever heard it before. Celeste nodded, her throat tightening. "Yes, I did." Lyra didn't say anything more. Instead, she simply watched Celeste, waiting for her to continue. I think it's time I told you the truth," Celeste said, her voice barely a whisper. She could feel the words heavy on her tongue, like they were coated in lead. But she had to say them. "I'm not who you think I am." Lyra's brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't interrupt. She just stood there, arms folded across her chest, waiting for Celeste to explain. Celeste swallowed, feeling the weight of her confession. "I came here undercover. I'm the CEO of the company. My real name is Celeste North, and I've been using an alias to investigate what's been happening behind the scenes. I've been trying to expose the corruption, the exploitation, and the injustices that are happening to the workers here." For a long moment, there was silence. Lyra's face remained unreadable, her eyes fixed on Celeste as if processing the information. Celeste's heart hammered in her chest as she waited for Lyra's response, her stomach churning with anxiety. "I see," Lyra said finally, her voice quiet. "So this whole time, you've been pretending to be someone else." "Yes," Celeste admitted, her voice thick with guilt. "I've been lying to everyone. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could just do my job and get out. But then," she faltered, the weight of everything she had been keeping inside threatening to break her. But then I met you, and everything changed. I didn't expect to feel this way. I didn't expect you to mean so much to me." Lyra remained silent, her gaze unwavering as she processed Celeste's words. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Celeste could feel the sting of her own betrayal, and she knew it was written all over her face. She couldn't hide the shame, the fear, the regret. "I'm sorry," Celeste whispered, her voice cracking. "I never wanted to hurt you." Lyra's expression softened, just the slightest bit, but it was enough to make Celeste's chest tighten. For a brief moment she thought maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to fix things. But then Lyra spoke again, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "You don't get to apologize for that, Celeste," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "You don't get to apologize for lying to me, for using me. I trusted you. I thought you were different." The words hit Celeste like a physical blow, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She wanted to argue, to tell Lyra that she never meant to deceive her, that her feelings had never been part of the plan. But the truth was, they were part of the plan. They had always been. Celeste had tried so hard to keep her emotions locked away, but Lyra had seeped in through the cracks. She had shattered the walls Celeste had built, and now there was nothing left to hide behind. "I never meant for this to happen," Celeste said, her voice small. "But it did. And I don't know how to fix it." Lyra's eyes flickered with a mixture of pain and frustration. "I don't know if you can fix it, Celeste. Trust isn't something you can just rebuild after it's been broken. Not like this." The words stung, but Celeste knew they were true. She had betrayed Lyra's trust, and she wasn't sure there was a way back from that. But she couldn't give up, not yet. She wasn't ready to lose Lyra. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Celeste said, her voice low. "But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I've been trying to do the right thing, to fix the system. But I don't know how to fix this." Lyra's gaze softened slightly, but there was still an edge to her voice. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Celeste. You've been hiding who you really are this whole time. How am I supposed to trust anything you say?" Celeste opened her mouth to respond, but the words failed her. She didn't have an answer. She couldn't fix what she had broken. All she could do now was stand there, vulnerable, and wait for Lyra's decision. Lyra turned away, her back to Celeste, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Celeste's heart ached in the quiet, the weight of the distance between them nearly suffocating her. She had wanted to fix this, to make things right, but now she wasn't sure it was possible. "I need time," Lyra said, her voice tight. "I need to think about everything." Celeste nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll give you all the time you need." With that, Lyra walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty factory. Celeste stood there for a long time, her heart heavy with regret. She had done what she could to explain herself, but the damage had already been done. All she could do now was wait, and hope that, somehow, Lyra would find it in her heart to trust her again. The days after Lyra had walked away felt like an eternity to Celeste. Time stretched and warped around her as she wandered through the motions of her life at the facility, barely able to focus on the work that had once been her sole priority. The constant hum of machinery, the soft murmur of voices in the background, and the papers she pushed around her desk. All of it felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else's life. She hadn't heard from Lyra since that night, and it was as if the universe itself was conspiring to keep them apart. The weeks felt long and painful, a quiet space where Celeste wrestled with her thoughts. She knew she had broken something between them, something fragile and pure that couldn't be easily mended. She had lied to Lyra, and there was no simple way to undo that betrayal. But she also knew that she couldn't let it end like this. She couldn't walk away from Lyra and pretend nothing had changed, pretend that the way she felt about her didn't matter. If she was going to salvage anything, she had to confront it all. Her feelings, her secrets, and the fear that had kept her locked in a cage of her own making. One evening, unable to bear the quiet isolation any longer, Celeste made a decision. She would find Lyra. She would tell her everything, and whatever the outcome, she would face the consequences. She couldn't live in this limbo forever. She found Lyra in the break room, sitting by the large windows that overlooked the vast stretch of land outside the facility. It was late, the rest of the employees gone home for the night, but Lyra had stayed behind, as she often did, to finish her work. Celeste stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the sight of her, the way the soft light of the room bathed her in warmth, how her face was illuminated in a way that made everything about her seem so painfully beautiful. Lyra didn't seem to notice Celeste standing there at first. Her focus was on the papers in front of her, her brow furrowed in concentration. Celeste took a slow breath, gathering her thoughts. She had to say something, anything, to break the silence. "Lyra," Celeste said, her voice softer than she intended. Lyra's head snapped up, her eyes locking with Celeste's. There was a moment of stillness, a brief flash of something unreadable in Lyra's expression. Then she stood, setting her papers aside. "I didn't expect you to come back here," Lyra said quietly, the edge in her voice still present, though it was tempered by something else now, a hint of vulnerability. Celeste stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "I needed to see you. I can't keep pretending like nothing happened. I can't keep running from this." Lyra's gaze flickered, a mix of uncertainty and resignation settling in her eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready to talk about this, Celeste. You broke my trust." The words stung, but Celeste had expected them. She had no right to ask for anything else. "I know," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her guilt. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I can't walk away from you either. She paused, struggling to find the right words. "I've never felt this way before. I didn't mean for this to happen. You mean something to me. You're more than just a part of my investigation. And I can't hide from that anymore." Lyra looked away, her shoulders tense. She folded her arms across her chest, a small defensive gesture that Celeste recognized all too well. "I don't know what you want from me. You lied to me. You used me, Celeste. I trusted you." Celeste stepped forward, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't use you. I never meant to. I came here to do a job. But you—" She swallowed hard, her eyes softening. "You changed everything. I didn't expect to care about you, but I do. More than I can explain." For a long moment, Lyra remained silent, her expression unreadable. Celeste's heart was in her throat, each beat echoing in the quiet room. She could feel the distance between them, but she refused to let it grow wider. She couldn't leave things like this. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Celeste said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know that, but I'm asking for a chance to make things right, to be honest with you, to show you that I can be someone you can trust." Lyra's gaze softened, just a fraction. She uncrossed her arms, her fingers resting on the edge of the table. Celeste watched her, waiting for the inevitable decision that would change everything. "I don't know if I can trust you again," Lyra said, her voice quiet. But there was no anger in it, just sadness, a deep ache that Celeste couldn't ignore. "But I want to believe that you're telling me the truth now, that the person standing here is the person you want to be." Celeste nodded, her chest tight with emotion. "I want to be that person. For you. I spent so long hiding, so long keeping everyone at a distance, including myself. But you made me realize that I can't keep doing that." Lyra looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Celeste held her breath, her heart pounding in her ears. Finally, Lyra sighed, the sound carrying a weight of its own. "I can't promise anything," she said quietly. "I can't promise that I'll just forgive you and everything will be fine. But I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to try. I can't keep going like this either." Celeste felt a wave of relief wash over her, though she knew this was far from over. It wasn't a clean resolution. It wasn't a guarantee of anything. But it was a beginning, a fragile one, but a beginning nonetheless. "I'll do whatever it takes to show you that I'm here for you," Celeste said, her voice steady, even if her heart was still racing. "I just need the chance." Lyra nodded slowly, her gaze softening just a little. "We'll see." There was a long, charged silence between them, a moment that felt like it could stretch into eternity. But Celeste didn't mind. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something new, something real. Whatever came next, she knew it wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. As Lyra moved to gather her things, Celeste took a tentative step forward. She didn't know where this path would lead them, but for the first time, she was no longer afraid to walk it. "I'll see you tomorrow?" Celeste asked, her voice quiet. Lyra hesitated, her eyes searching Celeste's face. Then, with a small nod, she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow." And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving Celeste standing alone, her heart full of hope and uncertainty. The road ahead was still unclear, but for the first time, Celeste didn't feel the need to hide. She would face whatever came, and maybe, just maybe, they would find a way forward together. The following days were a blur of tentative steps and quiet exchanges, each moment fraught with the weight of what had been said and what still lingered unspoken between Celeste and Lyra. Their interactions were no longer filled with the casual ease they once shared. There was a certain tension now, a careful distance that both of them tried to navigate, unsure of where to place their trust, or how to rebuild what had been fractured. Celeste had made it clear that she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right, but every word, every action felt like walking on fragile ground. She had tried to show Lyra the depth of her regret through small gestures. A cup of coffee placed on Lyra's desk, a quiet word of encouragement during meetings. But each of these attempts seemed to fall short of the forgiveness she longed for. Lyra accepted them without comment, but the walls between them hadn't come down. They were just there. It was late one evening when Celeste found herself standing in front of Lyra's office, staring at the door. The building had emptied out for the day, save for a few workers finishing their shifts in the back rooms. But Celeste couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time. She had given Lyra space, but now she could feel the urgency building inside her. She needed to know where they stood, to understand if there was even a possibility of moving forward. The decision felt too big to make alone, but perhaps if she just asked Lyra to speak openly, without the barriers of her position, without the pretense, they could bridge the gap. Celeste knocked lightly, a soft rap that echoed in the silence of the hall. When she didn't hear a response, she hesitated. The weight of the moment pulled at her, but then, almost instinctively, she reached for the handle and turned it slowly. Inside, Lyra was hunched over her desk, a pile of papers scattered in front of her. The lamp cast a dim light over the room, but the darkness outside was creeping in, a reminder of how late it had gotten. She didn't look up when the door clicked open, and Celeste stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the sight of her. It was hard to explain, but Celeste hadn't realized how much she missed the ease in their interactions. The quiet, unspoken connection they had shared. It was gone now, and there was a heaviness in the air that wasn't there before. Lyra's hand paused in mid-motion as if she had felt Celeste's presence, but she didn't immediately acknowledge her. After a long, uncomfortable silence, she finally spoke. "You're still here." Celeste's heart sank, but she didn't step back. She had to keep going. "I'm sorry if I'm interrupting. I wanted to talk. I know I've been doing a lot of talking, but this time I need to listen." Lyra didn't respond right away, but she sat back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. Her posture was defensive, but there was a quiet sadness in the way she avoided meeting Celeste's gaze. "I don't know what you want from me, Celeste," Lyra said, her voice quiet, tinged with frustration. "You keep apologizing, and you keep promising things will be different, but nothing changes." "Not really." "I know," Celeste admitted, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "I've been trying, but I can't fix everything with just words. I can't erase what I've done, but I can show you. I can prove that I'm not the same person who came in here pretending to be someone else." Lyra's expression tightened at that. "But you were that person. You were the one who lied. You were the one who didn't see me as a person. How am I supposed to just forget that?" The sharpness in Lyra's voice stung, but Celeste refused to back down. She couldn't afford to. "Not now. I can't ask you to forget," Celeste said, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions flooding her chest. But I want to be someone who earns your trust, not just someone who asks for it. Lyra's eyes flickered with something that might have been hope, or maybe it was just weariness. She sighed, letting her arms drop to her sides as she leaned back in her chair. I don't know how to trust you again, Celeste. I don't know if I can. Celeste took a step closer, her breath shallow. Then let me show you. Let me prove it to you. I don't want you to just forgive me. I want to earn back what we had. Lyra met her gaze then, her eyes searching Celeste's face as if trying to read her. Celeste could feel the weight of Lyra's scrutiny, the way she was measuring the truth of Celeste's words. For a moment, Celeste wondered if she would walk away again, if Lyra would simply shut her down and retreat further into herself. But instead, Lyra did something unexpected. She uncrossed her arms and stood, walking to the window where the last light of the evening reflected off the glass. She stared out at the darkening sky for a long moment before speaking again. I don't know what to do with you, Celeste, Lyra said, her voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. I don't know if I can keep doing this. I'm not sure I can keep letting you in. The words hit Celeste harder than she expected. She had anticipated anger, frustration, even rejection. But the quiet resignation in Lyra's voice pierced her heart, because it was clear that Lyra was torn. She wanted to let go of the hurt, wanted to let Celeste in again. But there was a wall now, a barrier that neither of them had the answers to. I don't want to hurt you anymore, Celeste said, her voice raw. But I can't keep pretending that I don't care. I can't keep lying to myself. Care about you, Lyra. I always have. And if there's any chance for us to find a way back, I'll do whatever it takes. Even if it's just one step at a time. Lyra's shoulders slumped slightly as she turned back toward Celeste, her eyes softening just a fraction. One step at a time, she repeated, almost to herself, before meeting Celeste's gaze again. I don't know if that's enough, but it's a start. Celeste nodded, her chest tightening with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. They weren't there yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time in weeks, there was a crack in the wall between them. A crack that, with time, might just be enough to rebuild what they had lost. I'll take whatever chance you can give me, Celeste said softly, the sincerity in her voice unmistakable. I just want you to know I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Lyra didn't answer right away, but she didn't turn away either. The silence stretched between them, but this time it didn't feel heavy with unresolved tension. There was room for something new, something that might eventually heal the rift they had created. As Lyra finally gave a small, reluctant nod, Celeste felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't a promise that things would be easy, but it was a chance, and that was all she needed. I'll see you tomorrow, Lyra said, her voice quieter now. Celeste's heart gave a small, hopeful leap. Tomorrow, she agreed. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been broken. The days following their quiet conversation in Lyra's office were filled with a strange mixture of hope and uncertainty. Celeste found herself trying harder than ever before, determined to show Lyra that she wasn't just the person who had deceived her, but someone capable of change, someone who truly wanted to earn her trust. Each gesture felt like a fragile bridge, one she wasn't sure would be strong enough to span the distance between them, but she was willing to try. At work, things had become somewhat routine again. They passed each other in hallways and exchanged brief words in meetings. But there was always a subtle tension lingering in the air. Lyra was still cautious, still guarded, but Celeste could sense the slow thawing of the walls around her. They were moving forward, even if it was in tiny steps. But Celeste could tell Lyra was still wrestling with the same doubts that had kept her at a distance. One evening, several weeks after their last conversation, Celeste found herself back at the same window in the break room where Lyra had spent countless hours, trying to distract herself from the growing ache in her chest. The room was empty now. The last of the employees had left for the day, and the building had a quiet, almost solemn feel. Celeste was alone with her thoughts, but something inside her kept telling her she couldn't let the silence stretch for too long. Not this time. She needed to see Lyra, to finally have the conversation they both needed. Taking a deep breath, Celeste made her way toward Lyra's office. It was quiet now, the evening shadows spilling across the room as she paused outside the door. She wasn't sure what she expected. Maybe an angry confrontation. Maybe a tearful release of everything they had both been holding back. But when she opened the door, the last thing she anticipated was to find Lyra sitting there, eyes fixed on her with an expression that mixed both uncertainty and something else. Something that felt almost like longing. Lyra didn't say anything at first, but Celeste could feel the weight of her gaze. The way Lyra's eyes lingered on her as though she were measuring every inch of her. Celeste had thought about this moment 1,000 times. But now that it was here, her thoughts were scattered. She had no words to offer that hadn't already been said. No grand gesture to undo the past. All she could do was stand there and hope that, in the silence, something would change. Lyra? Celeste started, her voice tentative, unsure. Can we talk? Lyra's lips pressed together, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. I think it's time we do. Celeste stepped into the room, the door clicking shut softly behind her. She stood across from Lyra, both of them silent for a long moment. Neither of them knew where to start, but Celeste could sense the weight of the conversation that had been hanging over them for weeks. Do you remember when we first met? Celeste asked suddenly, the question tumbling out before she had time to think about it. You were the first person who ever made me feel like I wasn't just a corporate robot, like I could actually matter here. Lyra's eyes softened, though her expression remained guarded. She nodded slowly. I remember. You were so different back then. So distant. Like you didn't even want to be here. I was, Celeste admitted. I was trying to be someone I wasn't. I thought that was the only way to be successful. I thought if I kept pushing people away, I wouldn't have to deal with the mess of emotions that came with being human. But you changed that. You made me realize I didn't have to hide. Lyra's gaze faltered for a moment, and Celeste saw the flicker of something raw and vulnerable in her eyes. She wanted to reach out to close the gap between them, but she knew better than to force it. This wasn't something that could be rushed. Then why did you lie to me, Celeste? Lyra asked quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Why did you pretend? Why did you use me? I didn't mean to, Celeste replied, her voice trembling with the weight of the truth. I was so focused on my mission, on getting everything perfect, that I didn't realize what I was doing to you. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you until it was too late. Lyra's expression tightened, but there was no anger in her voice when she spoke. It wasn't just the lies, Celeste. It was the trust. You asked me to trust you, and I did. And then you broke it. Celeste swallowed, the words sticking in her throat. She had known this conversation was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. I know, she said softly, her voice filled with remorse. I never meant to hurt you, but I understand now that you can't just expect trust to be rebuilt by saying the right things. I have to show you, day by day, that I'm someone who deserves it. Lyra was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on Celeste as if trying to read her, trying to figure out if what she was saying was true. Celeste could feel the weight of the silence press against her chest, each second dragging her deeper into a state of uncertainty. I've been thinking a lot about this, Lyra said finally, her voice low but steady. About what happened, about us. And the truth is, I don't know if I'm ready to just forgive you and move on. But I also don't want to keep living like this. It's tearing me apart. Celeste. Celeste's heart clenched, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she could bear the heaviness of the words hanging in the air. But she nodded slowly, understanding. I'm not asking you to forgive me just like that, she said. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be better. That I can be the person you deserve. Lyra's eyes softened just a fraction, but it was enough for Celeste to feel a glimmer of hope. I don't know if I can trust you again, Lyra admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm willing to try. It wasn't the perfect resolution. It wasn't the grand declaration of love or a clear-cut answer. But it was a start. It was a step forward. Celeste took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and fear settle in her chest. That's all I can ask for. The quiet between them stretched on for a moment, but this time it didn't feel like a wall. It felt like the calm before something important, something worth fighting for. I'll give you a chance, Lyra said softly, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her eyes. But I need time. I need to know that you're not just saying this because you think it's what I want to hear. I understand, Celeste said, her voice thick with emotion. And I'll give you all the time you need. As they stood there in the quiet of the office, the weight of everything that had happened still hung heavy in the air, but Celeste felt a sense of something shifting. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, and there was no guarantee of a smooth path. But for the first time in a long while, Celeste felt like they had a chance. And that was enough for her to keep going. The weeks that followed were a slow, steady process of rebuilding. Celeste and Lyra, no longer bound by the lies and pretense that had defined their early days together, found themselves navigating a new kind of relationship, one based not on corporate power or hidden identities, but on mutual respect and, perhaps, the faintest trace of something more. Every day was another step forward, and while the weight of the past never fully disappeared, there was a growing sense of possibility in the air between them. Celeste had learned, slowly but surely, that trust wasn't something that could be demanded. It was something that had to be earned, over time, with every action, every word, every gesture. She had been used to controlling situations, to directing the narrative, but with Lyra, everything felt different. She wasn't just trying to fix things. She was learning to be patient, to listen, and most importantly, to accept the vulnerability that came with not having all the answers. For the first time, she didn't have a clear blueprint for success, but she was willing to find her way step by step. Lyra, for her part, was equally committed to the process. Her heart still carried the scars of the betrayal, the sharp sting of feeling used, manipulated by someone she had trusted. Yet, as the days passed, she found herself slowly opening up again, allowing Celeste back into her world, bit by bit. She would never forget the hurt, but there were moments now, moments when they sat together in the office or shared quiet conversations over lunch, where the rawness of that pain didn't seem quite so overwhelming. The trust was rebuilding, but it was fragile, and she knew that the road ahead was still uncertain. One afternoon, a month after their late-night conversation in Lyra's office, Celeste found herself standing outside Lyra's door again. She had grown used to these quiet moments of hesitation, times when she would catch herself second-guessing whether she was doing enough or if she was pushing too hard. But today felt different. There was a quiet optimism in the air, a sense that they were on the verge of something important. With a gentle knock, she opened the door. Lyra was seated at her desk, a soft smile on her face as she looked up from her work. It had been a while since they'd shared a moment like this. Just the two of them, no pressure, no pretense. It felt like a small but significant step forward. "Hey," Celeste said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "Got a minute?" Lyra didn't hesitate. "Of course," she replied, her voice warm but cautious. "Come in." Celeste walked in, closing the door softly behind her. She stood in the center of the room for a moment, unsure of what to say, but she didn't have to wait long for Lyra to speak again. "You've been quiet today," Lyra observed, her voice gently probing. "Something on your mind?" Celeste sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I've been thinking a lot. About us. About where we're headed." Lyra's eyes softened as she set down her pen. "I think about that too." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Rather, it felt like a shared moment of reflection. A brief pause before the next chapter began. Celeste could sense that Lyra was ready for something more, ready to move past the uncertainty, but the hesitation was still there. Celeste could feel it in the way Lyra held herself, in the way she avoided meeting her eyes too directly. "I know I can't fix everything overnight," Celeste began, her voice steady but laced with vulnerability. "But I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you want me to." Lyra studied her for a long moment before responding, her gaze soft but piercing. "I'm not sure if I know what I want, Celeste," she admitted. "But I do know that I don't want to keep living in the past." I don't want to keep carrying all that hurt around with me. I can't keep letting it control me. And I don't want to lose you. Celeste's heart ached at the quiet confession, the vulnerability in Lyra's words. It wasn't easy for her to admit that much, and Celeste knew it. For the first time in weeks, she felt like they were standing on the same ground, their intentions aligned. The distance between them wasn't gone, but it was no longer insurmountable. I'm not asking you to forget, Lyra, Celeste said softly, taking a step closer. But I want to be here in whatever way that makes sense for us. I want to show you that you can trust me again. I want that too, Lyra replied, her voice low but filled with emotion. I don't know how to let go of everything that happened. How do you let go of something like that? Celeste felt the familiar pang of guilt, but she didn't shy away from it. You don't let go of it all at once, she said gently. You take it day by day. You don't have to forgive me today or tomorrow, but you give me a chance to show you who I am now, to show you that I'm not the same person I was. Lyra met her gaze then, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. It was a look that said she wasn't ready to rush back into anything, but it also said she wasn't giving up on the possibility of healing. Okay, she said, her voice soft but firm. One step at a time. That's what we've got, right? Celeste's heart swelled with emotion at the simple, yet profound, acceptance in Lyra's words. One step at a time, she repeated, a small smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't the resolution Celeste had once imagined, the grand gesture or the perfect ending. But it was enough. It was real. They had both made mistakes. They had both hurt each other. But now they were choosing to move forward together in whatever way that looked like. As the day turned to evening, the soft hum of the office around them felt less like an intrusion and more like a quiet promise. The work, the pressure, the expectations, they were all still there. But for once, they didn't feel like an obstacle. They were just another part of the life they would build together, one step at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that was the kind of foundation they needed after all. Not perfection, but the willingness to try. The willingness to grow, to heal, and to trust again. I'll see you tomorrow, Celeste said, her voice light but full of something deeper. Something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. Lyra nodded, her eyes soft but resolute. Tomorrow. And with that, Celeste stepped out of the office, the door clicking softly behind her. The uncertainty wasn't gone, but it didn't matter. She had a chance to make things right, and that was all she needed.